And good morning, everyone, to this. Good morning, everyone, to this Tech Talk. Welcome.
Hello.
And welcome, Phil. Good morning.
Good morning. Thank you very much for having me. Nice to see you.
Let's do the Tech Talk of today. I'm very happy that you are here, and we are proud to present our second part of the cybersecurity. And for your information, we will do a recap of the version 1 of part 1 in a moment. Let's glance at the agenda for a second. So we will do the review of the part 1 as mentioned, and today the main topic is a collaborative detection and prevention concept. First we go through the concept, you want to explain it, how it works and everything. Then we do the actions, how do you configure it and everything like this. We do a live demo, we have prepared something with the ATP, I understood, and then we will go for the solution window as well as your feedback. And we have some valid feedback received that we would like to share. So before we start, I would like to highlight once again the Campus Academy, so academy.zyxel.eu. If you have missed anything, if you want to rewatch something, or if you have missed part 1, for example, you can always find the details there. You can do your certification also on the Campus Academy for Zyxel Certified Network Engineer or Professional, depending on what state you want to go for. And yeah, TECHtalk we mentioned, so just to mention this again, and where to find all this is on the next slide. You have, again, all our portals, the partner portal, support portal, and the Campus Academy, all can be reached via the SSO access. And one information I would like to share with you also, you can watch your accounts at account.zyxel.eu. There you can modify something, and then you can go into the various portals. And if you go to Partner Portal, there you can also find under My Benefits how you can get your benefits, which are, for example, a free course. Right. Now, if you have any questions, please use the question window. I have it here in front of me. I'm trying to answer your questions, but I will also raise them here in the audience if that's possible. So please make use of that. And now, having said that, Phil, please, let's dive into the topic of cybersecurity. Let's look what we have done last time. And then start with CDR.
So let's first start with a recap from part 1 of our cybersecurity series, so to speak. So we first introduced the zero trust cybersecurity concept. What that means is basically when you have some sort of network set up, then you have to have full visibility, full control, full reaction. What does that mean? Because these are kind of the pillars of cybersecurity. Visibility means you always have to know what's going on in your network. It's absolutely mandatory that you as the administrator are aware of what's going on in the network, what's happening there. Control means that you have to have some sort of, let's say, policy regulations which disallow or allow traffic in any shape or way you want to accommodate to that. And reaction means that if something goes wrong, because every, stuff goes downhill sometimes, you have to be able to react somehow. In our case, we're now specifically looking at cybersecurity and we're looking at the UTM features. And this is basically the part which is, let's say, entailed into the reaction part.
Correct.
So why do we have to do that at all? So that was also one part of the recap from last time. We have to do that because we got a bring your own device culture, which has basically skyrocketed compared to a few years back. So for example, when I came into the company a few years ago, bring your own device was a thing, but not that much as it is today. Today, everybody brings their own laptops, their own smartphones. I think, especially the coronavirus pandemic has shown that, that there's kind of a very narrow field between private and business, kind of segregation in that sense.
Very true.
We got a higher risk of malware. So when we're looking at the changing network culture, we have a lot more malware going on. We got, I think ransomware was one of the top priorities and the top topics in the last years. And as said before, coronavirus showed that smart working, so working from home, working from a hotel, no matter where you are, just getting your work done is a thing. And it's getting more and more a thing. And I think in order to tailor towards these things, we need this zero trust cybersecurity concept. What we looked at specifically in part 1 was the device insight, which is a functionality of our firewalls, which give you full control over your network in the shape of that it lets you know what devices are in your network actually, and it shows the status such as which device is online, offline, what OOS, so what operating system is on there, what category does it belong to, and it also showed what is blocked by CDR. And speaking of CDR, that's exactly what we got prepared for us today.
Before you go into that,
Yes.
Phil, I have a question, and that is, okay, from your experience, what do you think? Where are we using the CDR feature mostly? Where would you recommend customers to use it?
So I would personally say that CDR is something which is best suited into small, medium businesses, also on enterprise level, if you will. So, but that's not actually what we're now tailoring towards. What I also would still emphasize is normally in home user environments, you might take different measurements. So you might, instead of going with CDR, we'll explain what that actually is, and then out of the context, this will become more apparent. Normally in home user environments, you will rather have like an anti-malware program installed, and that will be kind of your protection of the singular clients, while CDR basically is propagated onto the Wi-Fi access points. But still, I would say if you have a large network where you have a lot of different clients and you have a lot of fluctuation in terms of PCs coming in and out for whatever reason, that can be, for example, that you have your small business network combined with your home network because maybe you have a own shop or something where you have guests. So that might be something where CDR still might make sense. But I think this will become more apparent once we dive into how it exactly works, what you need for that.
Let's look into the concept then first.
Okay, so what we got over here is collaborative detection and response. That is also abbreviated often by CDR. So we will talk very often about CDR, collaborative detection response. It's the same thing. And what it does is it extends the cybersecurity towards the network edge. Now that's very technically from a terminology point of view. What does that mean basically? That means basically that I can leverage the security frontier towards the access points instead of only being the firewall, the main, let's say, security implementing device.
So pushing out the security from the firewall to the access point, basically.
Exactly. So I'm extending I would say my safe haven, my safe haven within the network. I'm extending that towards the edge when we're talking about Wi-Fi.
Yep, correct.
What we are using in order to recognize whether or not we are in such a detecting state. So collaborative detection and response means we're collaborating, access points and firewalls, and we are responding to it by doing certain actions. And we do that based on IDP profiles, anti-malware, and the URL threat filter. As said before, this acts together with CapWeb managed access points, and they catch upon malicious acting or infected clients. That looks like this. We'll first talk about how it used to be kind of in a legacy setting.
Correct.
We got our firewall, we got the switch, and then we got a normal layer 2 network. If I, as a client, would access a malicious website, at some point in time, I would be blocked by the firewall. So that's straightforward. The risk which I have is that these UTM features will work on layer 3. This bears anyways the danger that my layer 2 network, meaning my switch and my other clients, they still can communicate with each other in theory. And that in turn means that this is still a potential infectious spread, which can go on. CDR tries to take this to a different approach where we have an Wi-Fi access point and we have the client connecting. And that means this client is now making unsafe connections to a malicious website. The firewall is now recognizing that there is a danger, will propagate this to the access point to tell that disassociate this client, and then other actions are taken. So we're basically extending this towards the access point.
Yeah, we're looking into what kind of actions we are taking in a minute.
Exactly.
And as you can see from the drawing, it works in a way that you have a Zyxel firewall, you have a Zyxel access point,
exactly,
and then it works smoothly together. Exactly. How about the switch? That should be a Zyxel, but it's not 100% mandatory.
Exactly. Right. So what we need is, or we got the question in our previous version in the German TECHtalk, does it only work with Zyxel equipment? In this case, unfortunately, I have to say yes. The reason for this is, I mean, not unfortunately, you know, I work for Zyxel, so it's not that unfortunate. But still, the reason for that is that the access point is being cap web managed by the firewall,
Correct.
and the UTM bundle or the UTM setup is set on the firewall. I cannot think of any combination where you could extrapolate or take this out of context. I mean, CapWeb is a protocol which is readily available. So yeah, in theory, maybe on a different access point, you could set it to CapWeb, but you could not get it to work together with the UTM bundles because this is rather proprietary technology than anything else.
Yep.
So that is something to keep in mind. But as said, the VLAN is basically the VLAN switch setup is not mandatory to be Zyxel. That can be basically any.
Can we go back one slide? So just that we know the setup, everybody knows the setup. That's the setup we will go through in a bit. We will also see further setups. But what we want to show with this picture is that we do have the firewall, we have the switch and the access point. There's a number of access points which are supporting the feature CDR. We will look into this in a moment. And what we are saying is that when we are disassociating the client, there are various actions possible.
Exactly.
We will show that in a second.
Exactly. One thing to note on this, I think that's important because we got the inquiry to go back to the slide. The slides are also available as a handout.
True. So as a part of this webinar, you can see them as a handout, but you can also see them on the Campus Academy again, where you can also find this recording afterwards.
Exactly. Okay, let's move onward. So the collaborative detection and response is working on different databases, as I said. So we got UDP signatures, sorry, no, not UDP, IDP signatures, or now we call them IPS. So that is basically the new term, which is basically an enhanced IDP. And what we have are different CVEs. We will talk about the CVEs in a moment, but first, let me also mention that we have anti-malware signatures and we have URL threat filter categories. The IPS signatures, one could argue, is very limited to a specific numbers of CVEs. So why is that? The reason is we don't take into consideration for CDR any kind of IPS signature which kind of tailors towards an external attack, like a denial of service attack from WAN onto my ATP. Has nothing to do with CDR. So we don't have to take it into consideration in implementing this. The first mention, the CVE 2019 0708, for example, is a remote desktop exploit. And that is something which is happening from the client. So you're being infected and then somebody uses this exploit to kind of captivate your network. And that is the stuff which we have to take into consideration on IDP or IPS signatures. So don't wonder that this is a very limited number of IPS signatures.
Great. And you mentioned it there that signatures are updated fully automatically. What's the time span? Is it once per week, once per day, or what is it?
So the time span for updating the signatures can be actually set up dynamically. So you can either set it to an hourly setup, to a daily setup, or once a week at a specific day and time. So you got all that flexibility which you need. I personally would say,
what's your experience? Exactly,
my experience would be that I would set it up daily, I think. You
daily?
know, like daily, once a day, you get your updates, and then
during nighttime when it's not so busy,
something like that.
Then you're sure you always have the latest information on the ATP, for example.
But it doesn't have to be exclusively on nighttime. That's not because it's not that much of a traffic. So it's basically only a database signature update.
Okay.
It's no wild.
It's working smooth and no problem at all. We could do it in the night. We don't have to do it in the night, and we could do it from 1 hour to once a week or something like that.
Exactly. So we got that flexibility.
Very flexible system then.
Exactly. But we're going to show that also on the ATP later on where we can set this up. We'll move back to the presentation. And yeah, anti-malware signature, we got all the signatures which are provided by our respective partner, maybe that be Bitdefender, Kaspersky, whoever we are working with at that specific time. And the URL threat filter categories are also set by the respective partner which we work with. And that's also taking a look into browser exploits, malicious downloads, malicious sites, and phishing.
Super.
So moving on, What devices can we establish CDR actually on? We can use it on all ATP gateways, on all UST Flex gateways, so all the newer generation devices. Not the VPN, unfortunately, because they don't have any UTM functionality.
Sure.
But on the AP side, we only got a few, which is basically our flagship tier. So we got the AX devices, WAX, and then the WAC 500 series.
I know you will show us a bit later the configuration, how it works on the ATP. Does it really differ from the configuration on the USC Flex?
No, absolutely not. There's not really.
It's just the same,
really
James functionality, everything. Just
basically exactly the thing.
Okay, perfect. And we will see if it's also possible in Nebula a bit later.
Exactly.
Yeah,
we got a slide regarding that one.
Good.
So the reason why we have to take a look at all of this stuff is now, of course, this is only Austria, small country, and is only 2020, but the trend, I think, can be assumed globally as well. The cybercrime rate is skyrocketing because there's more profit to make with this. So we all heard it in the news, ransomware is skyrocketing. And especially in Austria, you can see that when we compare this 2017, so that's not that long ago, we already have 2020, double the amount basically. Yeah. And I could easily imagine that during the coronavirus pandemic in 2021, that number is even way higher.
I think break-ins into homes are going less and less because of everybody's at home, but cybersecurity is getting a very, very important topic. Thanks for sharing this slide, and I guess for Europe it's even worse. So yeah.
So now let's get into the gutter, straight into the topic. Where do we set this up? What do we do with that one? We're going to first talk about the actions. So we can configure CDR via configuration security service, CDR collaborative detection and response, which is the tab which is open right now on this screenshot. We can enable this, and we then immediately after enabling it have the policies. The policies show different things. We got the categories, which are web threat, malware, IDP, or IPS. Then we got the event type description. So basically somebody who's not familiar with those things can actually also make a reference to that one. And we then have occurrence and duration. What does that mean? When we got the web threat, got a cough, got a drink, one zip.
So if I understand, you can configure there how often a customer or a client actually is going on a malicious web page, for example, and you can configure if the person is allowed to do that once, 2, or 3 times.
Exactly.
What we see here is the default configuration, correct?
That is the default configuration. So in our example, web threat, I go 3 times on a phishing website, and then there is a certain action which is tied to this. This is set into the containment. And we got 3 different action types. We got alert, block, and quarantine. So we had the question raised in the German TECHtalk version, why is the default set on 3 for occurrence? Because you normally would like to kind of be super tight, super secure.
1, and then you're done.
Exactly.
Sure. Yeah. Correct.
So the web threat will anyways propagate kind of a warning message that you are basically flagged because of the URL threat filtering. If you would set this up to an occurrence of once, and for example, you would set the containment to block, imagine the consequence which that has. Somebody goes on a phishing site and immediately they see this warning page and they're immediately blocked.
They're totally shocked.
They're totally shocked. Okay, total panic breaks out, So in order to kind of cater towards this, you can be a little bit more tolerant, but you also have the possibility, your occurrence can also be set to 1, so you can be super straight. But as a default value, there has to be some sort of tolerance threshold which you have to overcome in order to then reach that setup. So we got the 3 actions, alert, block, and quarantine. Let's explore what they actually do. Alert means the following. Just imagine I got a malicious website and I'm accessing this malicious website for n times, meaning in our case, 3 times.
Maximal 3 times.
Exactly. The content filter block page is displaying 3 times towards me. So I'm always getting that same URL threat filtering. We will see that in the screenshot and actually also in action as well. What the URL threat filter says, it basically says, hey, the site is not safe. You're not allowed to go there.
Don't do it.
Exactly. If I would then do this another time because I'm hard pressured to learn something, then I would access this malicious site, would still get my content filter block page, and in the background, an alert mail is sent by the firewall to the respective mail server.
That's the mail alert functionality possibility. Good.
So this is what the alert mail would look like as an, let's say, default template or an example.
Yeah, so that's one option.
Exactly, that's one option.
That's what I get back in my mailbox. I can see, I can see the IP address. I can go and check who is that, and go to the person and ask the person.
Exactly, and what are you doing? You'll not only have the IP address, you also got the MAC address, because you know everybody can change their IP address if they check for an small article on how to change the IP address. So we got the MAC address, which is a little bit harder to fake or to play with and tinker with, and that way you should have a certain amount of control. But there are also logs set up, and I personally recommend combining this together with a syslog so that you basically get full insight.
So that you can see then later in the logs on the ATP.
Exactly.
Perfect.
Okay. So that is alert. Now let's move over to the block flow. The block flow, again, same thing. We're accessing the malicious site for a certain amount of times. We're always getting blocked, as it should be. Then we access this once more, then the occurrence set, and the ATP will now block the traffic from my LAN client. Now the same would apply for a Wi-Fi, where we basically just access this, and then we get disassociated. So that's that. Yep.
Yeah. Sorry. Just a question. So if I have a client that a page is blocked, then afterwards, does it also apply to a different client? So if I go to the malicious page with my computer, let's say, I get this message, it's blocked then at some point in time. If my neighbor goes to that page, is it also blocked for my neighbor?
No, it's not blocked for him. Everybody is, every client is looked at individually and basically tailored towards individually on CDR.
Okay.
So there's no full protection in the sense of once one person has it wrong, everybody is affected. This is something which is done by the client specifically, but the URL threat filter in itself is basically the big net.
Sure. That's coming after that.
Exactly.
Yeah, absolutely, yes. Good.
So moving on, we got exactly the block flow. So that's how it would look like. What consequences or what implementations does it have? Let me move over back to the LAN setup. So let's look at this thing. We're blocking on the ATP. That's nice and good. But what about my layer 2 network? I still can spread the infection, you know, throughout the network. Or I could, in theory, if I am now vulnerable to phishing or whatever, or malware, then that can spread throughout the network. And that is the reason why the third option is quite a nice thing, and that is quarantine. We all are familiar and a little bit sick and tired of the word quarantine. I do apologize for that one. So, but how it works is basically the following. My Wi-Fi clients, they access the malicious site for a certain amount of time. They get blocked as no usual. Then I still, not willing to learn, go to that site by brute force, and then I get disassociated. That's the first thing.
And now
comes the quarantine thing. Quarantine works with VLAN, so I got a VLAN set up on the ATP, got a VLAN set up on the access point, and I'm being shifted towards my quarantine VLAN with my client. So that client is now completely in its own network, cannot do anything in that respect, that it cannot communicate or cross-communicate with any other network
and
segment.
not affect other clients.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So then we are really as safe as it can get.
And from there, we definitely have to contact the IT department to get out of this again.
Exactly. There's no question about that. You are now basically, you're in trouble.
Yeah. I have to argue now. Yeah.
But at least you're not in trouble because of a malware, but because you have to now argue with the IT department.
True.
So that's the better argument. Okay, so we got the live demo. Live demo is rather a setup guide, because if I would now do everything which we have discussed, I would kick myself out and I could not do a live demo.
And so the IT department would knock at the door.
Exactly. So we have to find a compromise over here. So what I will do is I will show you how I set it up as an example and show you the tweaks and twists which you have to take into consideration when it comes to setting that up. So this is our topology, super straightforward. We got the ATP 500, we got the 610D, and then we got my laptop.
Are you using the ATP 500, which you are also using for the virtual lab?
No, I'm using actually another one, which I set up a few days ago. And to also get into the part one a little bit, the Wi-Fi client is my own laptop. So
okay.
we're having bring your own device again. Yeah. So
let's see if that's safe.
exactly.
I see.
So we got over here the live guide. Let's go out of the PowerPoint presentation into my TeamViewer session over here.
But I have a question. While you were
Yes.
preparing, let's say, the ATP that we have in our virtual lab, did you also configure CDR there?
I know that I've spoken with Tobias, so one of my colleagues who also very often does tech talks and is even a more senior level than I am. He has actually tried to set up yesterday on the fly ATP 800 with CDR. We actually got so far that we got it to work, but we kicked ourselves out.
Okay.
So we
okay.
deemed
It works perfectly fine.
exactly,
That's what you're saying. Good.
So we deemed this kind of setup for not working well within for showing.
But nevertheless, you should mention that if you're interested to see how we are configuring our devices, you can go to support.zyxel.eu. There you find the demo zone and the virtual lab. There we have devices, and with a demo password and username, you can connect to the device and you can check yourself how did Zyxel configure their, for example, ATP. So it's definitely something that you could look at.
Exactly, absolutely.
And now over to your demonstration. And sorry for that.
All good. No, nothing to apologize for. So we got the unit over here. Perhaps I got to click one more time somewhere in order to kind of trigger that I have to re-log in myself. No, it's actually working. Cool. Okay, so we got the dashboard as normal as it gets. Then we go to the configuration page. And then we would move over to the security services. And then we would have the CDR settings. The CDR settings, exactly, super easy, super intuitive in that sense that it's not hidden somewhere, totally obstructed. So we got the enable, we got the policies, which we already discussed. Down here, we got the counter reset. So once you hit a strike or you get a strike, basically resets your counter. We got the alert email, which you can set up. And then we got the block and quarantine message. So either you can set up the denied access message, which is by default, these are malicious network activities and so on and so forth. I'm not going to read the whole paraphrase. And you can also redirect the external URL. We were brainstorming during the last tech talk a little bit. What could you use this for? I'm now thinking that, let's say you got somebody who is trying to access a phishing site multiple times and then gets striked basically. You could, in theory, redirect them to the external URL where the administrator team would set up a form where the admin team could ask, hey, what have you done? So describe the process so that we can investigate on why it went wrong. And then you can say, oh, I got this mail and I clicked on the link because I want to log into Microsoft Windows. And then the IT admin team would immediately know, okay, we got something going on with phishing mails.
That's quite cool, actually. So
exactly.
They give directly feedback.
Exactly. You know, that would be one idea how you could use this redirect external URL function to really gain a benefit. So not only the company side or something, but really actually getting a cool benefit out of it for learning purposes.
Or to an IT side, call IT immediately, these kind of stuff.
Yeah, exactly.
Whatever is possible.
Exactly.
Right.
So we got the block wireless client. That's the thing which we looked at in our containment flow or in our block containment flow. And we got the quarantine VLAN ID. So if you now just simply type in a VLAN ID, you actually cannot do that because it's grayed out, because you need an actual VLAN.
I need to configure a VLAN before I can push them into quarantine.
Exactly.
I see.
So I got this VLAN 10 over here, which I set to quarantine. I set it up respectively, just that it's there.
It can be any VLAN. So I just have to define it once, and then this is my quarantine VLAN. Okay, I see.
However, this is basically the CDR setup already. Now let's take a look at what it takes into consideration. It takes into consideration the URL threat filter over here, which is looking at different categories. So we got here our phishing, the browser exploits, and so on and so forth. Now, I unfortunately cannot, as I said before, completely reproduce that we can walk through the entire segment, but I still want to showcase something. So I got, me as a musician, I got Thomann.de. That's a big music store selling, like an equipment store, similar to Sweetwater in the US or Anderton's in the UK.
You can bring your guitar next time if you want and play something for our customers here.
Yeah, it's noise which I make.
It's noise.
I make heavy metal.
Okay. Let's better continue here.
Exactly. No, but when we are taking a look at the sites which I'm blocking, I set them in the URL thread filter and I try to access them just to show you how it would look like if I, in theory, would go on the phishing site for the first time, for the second time, for the third time, so you would always get this kind of thing over here. Access restricted, please contact the administrator. So you're basically already being kind of striked, upon like, hey, this is something which is dangerous. Go to your administrator.
Don't do it.
Exactly. And this is for the other sites which I set up just to show that it worked throughout. The issue why I can't represent this for you today is Thomann.de, Musicstore.de, and also this from a local band over here. All of these websites are not categorized as phishing websites or browser exploits or something, because the URL thread filter actually looks at the categorization. So that's the reason why I cannot now trigger this 3 times and get into CDR, unfortunately. And I don't want to risk anything. We're not getting anyways through here because we got a big ATP, which works, which we found out. So we cannot really reproduce it over here. So, yeah, but that's basically everything there is to know about CDR. Just to recap, or just to show a little bit, when we're looking at the monitor and the security statistics and moving down here to CDR, we can see the containment list. We're now not seeing anything,
it's
of
empty,
course.
but you would see it there.
Exactly.
So how many entries can I see there?
Here you should be able to see 512, sorry.
Yeah.
And if you get a newer entry, then it will delete the oldest entry. So you got basically a constant fluctuation of 512 entries, or up to 512 entries. And over here you got 1024. The same applies over here. Newer stuff deletes the older stuff.
If you have 512 entries, I can tell you will be very busy anyway.
Yeah, exactly. So you should consider getting not so much. And just to recap, in regards of part 1, which we already spoken about, Device Insight is working on here as well, and you can easily see, got my PC over here, got my WAX over here. So that's really cool to see, just that it also works and that we're using that here as well.
Perfect. If you go to CDR configuration, please,
yes,
for me, I have one question there.
Yes.
So there you have, for example, IPS configured that the alert is what will be triggered. Could I also say that, okay, IPS, I want to have an alert, and as a first time, and if somebody does it the second time with IPS, I want to have send it to quarantine, for example?
Unfortunately not. You have to decide, you have to predetermine your strategy, which you want to set, which is anyways something which I would recommend. Like, you don't want to actually be kind of semi-tolerant and then be strict on it afterwards. It doesn't make that much sense. So you really have to decide if somebody has, let's say, for example, somebody has malware. I'm not being tolerant at all. Somebody gets 1 occurrence, 1 strike, boom, I'm in quarantine. Exactly.
Yeah.
On IPS, I can maybe be a little bit more tolerant with this. In my case, I allowed 2 occurrences and then set the align. And then set the alert, sorry. And on web threads, right now for testing purposes, I set it to quarantine, but then found out with the URL thread filter that it's not categorized the websites which I wanted to set up accordingly. So that was then for testing certain purposes. Yeah, so that's basically what you have to set up. You have to predetermine your strategy, stick with that one. Stick to your guns, basically.
I cannot mix it. I understood that. You need to define your strategy and then you go for it full.
Exactly.
All right.
So I think there was one question.
There was one question about VLANs and the quarantine.
Yep. So if the VLAN has to exist, yes, the VLAN quarantine has to exist. So when we go to network interface and we then go to the VLAN, I have to make sure that the VLAN is predetermined before I set it up into the quarantine.
You said it will be grayed out. So if I want to select VLAN, maybe you can go there to
I mean, maybe let's just do it on the fly because we can do it. Let's remove this.
Just delete it.
Exactly. VLAN interface is in use. Let's see where it is in use. So reference, CDR, and into this system.
So I can see where it's in use. Okay. Then you go there. And then you can select it. But if you want to select like something else, you cannot. You can go to add VLAN. What happens then?
So if let's try to go with 100. It doesn't allow this.
No.
So I would have to add VLAN. It's the same menu.
And then it's going back to the VLAN
Exactly.
configuration possibility,
And
which is great.
yeah.
So it's
Very-
straightforward,
very
very
nice.
easy. Yeah.
I mean, let's try.
What's
this
your
out.
recommendation? Which VLAN would you take it? Is there any like 99 or whatever? It doesn't
no,
make
it doesn't
sense.
really make the difference. Typically, the people want to use like the tenor numbers for different networks, like 10 for the guests, 10 for the employees, 20 for the employees, 30 for machines or whatever. So I would recommend to do something like completely out of the realm of what you usually would do, like 999, you know,
Exactly.
like very unusual. And that immediately should raise a flag when you look at your clients and you see, oh, somebody's in VLAN 999. I guess what that is, you know. So that should be that immediate red flag to a certain degree.
Good.
So having that out of the world.
Thank you for answering that question.
Very my pleasure.
And we got another question which we will answer in 2 slides. So just continue and then I will raise the question again.
Okay, perfect. Let's go back into the presentation. Starting from this slide. Okay. Yeah, that was the live guide. If you have any questions, of course, feel free to raise them. So we got the screenshots and the results over here. This is basically the same like you have seen. This is just for recap purposes. When you look at the handout later on, you can kind of refer to this and then remember, oh yeah, that's what Phil has shown and Carsten has also discussed with him. So, and these are the logs where I mentioned that it makes sense to set up a syslog. So what happens if somebody gets into the CDR system, he might get quarantined, and you now have to find out what happened. So we talk about redirect external URL, you make your form, but what if you don't have that? Then you can still check the logs
on monitor CDR.
Exactly, under monitor logs. No, monitor logs, that's where you find them.
Logs.
And then you can search them by the respective category. So URL threat filter, anti-malware, and so on and so forth. In my example, setting up Toman, it immediately flagged URL threat filter that something's going on. It blocked it over here, as you have seen. And if that happens a few more times, then the bottom right picture would appear. So there you really have not URL threat filtering, but collaborative detection response. Limited network access. It shows this message that there has been malicious traffic being detected on your device, and then you really have to contact your admin because you might got blocked or even quarantined.
Super. And I know, Phil, that we are coming back to a question that we have here. We know that we are both big fan of Nebula, cloud computing, cloud operation, configuration from everywhere where we are. Does this great feature also work in Nebula? That's the question.
Absolutely, it does. So in the next slide, we can see that we also have CDR available in the cloud managed firewalls, respective access points. The models are still the same, so there's no change in that one. And here you can see, we can find the function under site-wide, configure, collaborative detection response, and we got the same menu basically. Now, if you have eagle's eyes and you can see on this small slide, there's a small diamond icon beside collaborative detection and response. That means that this is a licensed feature. And unfortunately, I mean, not unfortunately, it kind of, out of the context of CDR is kind of apparent. It is something which is not available as a single license. The reason why this is apparent is it needs the UTM features in order to work.
It makes sense to have a bundle of that.
Exactly. So for the ATP series, it's included into the Gold Security Pack, while for the UC Flex series, it's included into the UTM Security Bundle or Security Pack. And these type of licenses can be purchased through either normal channels like the distributors or the Zyxel Marketplace at marketplace.zyxel.com. And also for our business partners, they can purchase these kind of licenses through Circle.
Correct. And Circle, if you don't know what Circle is, you go to support portal and then you type in Circle, then you will find it out. If we maybe make a tech talk about Circle, we let you know. It's definitely interesting. And yeah, thanks, Phil, for CDR insights, so to say. Some questions we could already answer. That was really, really great. For your information, the next cybersecurity tech talk we are planning for end of May. Then we will have part 3, obviously. And for your information, for your calendar planning and the like, is that always on the last Wednesday of each month at 11:30, we'll have the Tech Talk in English for your reference and your questions. And talking about questions, maybe you have we have some questions that we could answer here. There are no questions right now.
There are no questions.
Super, this is always great. But Phil, before we go on, do you have anything that you would like to mention in the context of CDR? What's our customers saying when they use CDR? What are they, do the clients, so the customers really feel, okay, I'm protected, I really have a great security implementation here? What's your experience?
So I would personally say that CDR is something which you're anyways getting through the bundle. You know, like you're purchasing the bundle, you anyways need the UTM features. So the question is at hand, why not use it? You know, and that's also the approach which I would definitely take when considering CDR. So I wouldn't say it's a question of should I actually buy CDR because you're buying it anyways.
The question is, should I actually enable CDR
you know,
or
exactly.
not? Yeah?
And it's so easy, you know, like you just enable it and you just set up your stuff and you're good to go.
The only thing I need to consider is I have to have the firewall and the access point from Zyxel, but which should be anyway the situation.
Exactly. And in most customer scenarios, I have to say that the people who trust in our access points also trust in our firewalls and also vice versa. So they anyways like to have a full-scale Zyxel network or a completely mixed-up network. So that's kind of the setup which I personally in the support activities found to be present the most. So people either say, okay, I want full reliability from one company, I'm going to go full scale Zyxel, or they just take whatever they get their hands on.
The best security setup, it's always good to go for one.
It's also a matter of support, you know, like if they call us and they say, hey, I got an ATP and I got a XGS switch and I got a WAX, then we can support this from head to toe. You know, there's no place where we cannot support it, you know. Otherwise, there's always a question of can we do it? You know, normally, especially in our support organization, we try our very best. So I'm not shy of at least looking at a Cisco switch, what the VLAN configuration is, but I cannot guarantee anything for that, you know. So that's always bearing a little bit of a risk over there. So the experience says that the customers are always going full scale Zyxel, in this case, for CDR anyways. And that is also, if you have that scenario, I would definitely use CDR because there's no question about it. You anyways have the stuff.
Yeah, and talking about security features and the like, we have received we have created a great article about that. So it's about how to diagnose all the settings and the things on the firewall. And on our support portal again, we have an article that is describing all the sub features. Let it be CDR, which we explained, let it be sandboxing, existing on the ATP only, and the rest,
Exactly. So we got basically the solution window is where we always kind of show a little bit of our support portal where you can have interesting, you know, like interesting tutorials, interesting documents or documentations. And this is the best practice for the ATP UTM features. We got all different kinds of explanations, of tutorials, of stuff written in there regarding all the different UTM features, which I found is very helpful in integrating because we're now talking about cybersecurity. So why not highlight this article? We got everything there, reputation filter, sandboxing, CDR, you name it. So definitely worth a look before you kind of just try to find your way through by clicking or, you know, so that's always a very reasonable and great resource in that sense.
And we have here a customer asking, he has received so many mails from our CDR, from his CDR setup that at some point in time his account was blocked and so on. But how did that happen? Of course, probably it was a big network, a lot of customers, clients going on whatever kind of occasions. If you find out that it's not so severe what the customers are doing, then you could increase the counter to reduce the number of emails that you're getting, of course.
So there are different methodologies to this. So you could either take away the reset hit counter, because once you reset the hit counter, it counts again and it resets and it counts again. So maybe that's some sort of vicious loop which is occurring. Also, you can set the occurrence a little bit higher. You can set the duration maybe a little bit longer,
Mhm.
so that you're not getting, out of the duration and then recycling or repeating the cycle. So that would be one thing. And of course, if there's no solution findable, contact us and we'll try to make it happen and find out what's going on over there.
Yeah,
So,
if that's also our recommendation, if there are some challenges in configuring or how the users perceive the setup, then please reach out to us, no problem, via the support portal, always no problem. And one other question is CDR on a switch,
okay,
layer 2.
Yep.
No.
Unfortunately not. I cannot think of any possibility right now. The reason for that is the layer switch is working on layer 2, and the all the UTM features and so on and so forth are working on layer 3.
Yeah, sure.
We don't have any way where we can kind of propagate and find out what's going on already in that respect. Maybe there's some very strange proprietary thing which could be developed in the future, but right now, technologically speaking, I cannot foresee any solution which would be nicely applicable. Maybe something with some sort of layer 2 isolation thing where we send out FFFF MAC address packets, but that would be something highly proprietary. And I personally would maybe think that this is then again another issue, because you then really have to completely go Zyxel. You have to have all the devices which support this, and I don't think it's worth the benefit, because everybody's now using Wi-Fi. Everybody wants to use actually now Wi-Fi nowadays. So you're rather going well with the quarantine VLAN setup than with anything else.
Yeah, that's right. So 100% correct. Yeah, no further questions so far.
Cool.
I do know that we also have received a question from David here last time.
Exactly.
Asking about VLANs on Nebula.
Exactly. And the answer to that is quite straightforward. Basically, so let's go back to the question. Let's read it out. How do I configure VLANs on Nebula? And the answer is, if you have, the answer is basically, it depends on, like always. No, but VLANs in Nebula make use of the so-called trunk feature. So when you're having switch, you're very similar to what Cisco has. We got this trunk and access set up. Trunk basically means that I am untagged on one specific VLAN, which by default is normally 1. I got the PVID set to 1, so we got those two matching hand and glove like, and all the other VLANs from 2 to 4096 in my thought experiment are set to trunk set to tagged by the trunk feature. That means what kind of implementation or implication does that have for most scenarios? If you set your scenario to having the management VLAN set to 1, which is anyways by default, and your guest VLAN, for example, being 20, then you don't have to really configure VLANs on the switches, because you just kind of have a plug and play scenario. The only thing which you have to set up, so let's imagine we got an ATP, we got an access point, and we got a cascade of switches. Then you would set up the VLAN on the ATP, you would set up the SSID on the access point with VLAN 20, and you would slam your switches in between, and it would work.
So that would be easy, save time in configuration.
Exactly.
That's straightforward. But we do get actually a lot of questions, and I can just recommend, if you have something that you would like to ask related to this tech talk, you can always go to academy.zyxel.eu, and then you can raise your question. And talking about VLANs now, as we have received quite a lot of questions around that, we decided that our next tech talk end of March will be around VLAN, how to configure, what's important, what do I need to do, and make sure that it's correctly set up. So that's something we invite you for. And nevertheless, we never leave you alone, and have our evaluated services. And there we give you the possibility to buy a configuration voucher, which then gives you the chance to have a configuration made by us, and you can look over our shoulder or on the digital screen, of course, and then learn and ask your questions directly to that configuration. And this could, for example, mean that you could try new things that you haven't been aware of and would like to do it with a supported person from our side. No problem at all. We're also doing that. Good. Yes, these are our social media sites. Then Let me check if I have received another question. Yes, we will do that. We will make sure that the possibility for registration for the next
Yes.
Tech Talk is out already today, later today. So that will be done. We are working on a possibility to subscribe to the Tech Talk so that you don't have to sign in all the time. But anyway, we are working on that to make it a bit more easier. But anything we forgot or anything you would like to mention?
I am right now out of my head. No, except for go get CDR.
Go get CDR, genau, exactly. It's easy thing if you have the license anyway, the pack, then you have CDR.
Exactly.
Get it configured, don't be shy. If you have problems, if you get too many messages, whatever, just reach out to us. We are very happy to help. Right, let's close here, Phil, and everybody out there. Thank you very much for joining. It was a pleasure again.
Thank you.
And see you next time.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.